Well, everybody, um, we are not in person today, which is, an unfortunate scenario, but something that is just the reality of where we are. Uh, you know, Everyone has very busy schedules. There's a lot of competing meetings. We've got holidays. We had the government shutdown that I think really impacted a lot of people's, schedules, made things even harder. And, financial challenges of, travel, which can be costly. So we are having this meeting today as a webinar. So we won't have the same type of networking that's possible and real, some of those important discussions that happen on the side. But we still hope there's a lot of great information you can take away from today's meeting. And the schedule is pretty packed. So, we want to just, remind you that these are more introductions to a lot of the different science updates we'll hear. And, where you have more, questions, please reach out to the presenters to find out more about the project. So, well, with that, I want to welcome everybody to today's meeting. I'm going to start off with just a brief background about KBMP, talk about a few of the recent projects we've been involved in, and then just go over a little bit about today's meeting. And a lot of people have heard all this before, so I don't want to, hammer it too much, but, we have been an organization that's been around since 2008. We're a voluntary organization that's led by different stakeholder organizations that have formed a steering committee that provide guidance and oversight to myself as the sole staff member. In a nutshell, we help with facilitating and coordinating water quality monitoring, and just in general try to support efforts that are meant to monitor and restore water quality. There's a lot of different things we're involved in, but two things to highlight briefly are the KBMP website, which really is just a major clearinghouse of different information for water quality, so much related data to that, reports, links to other organizations, news articles, and, it goes beyond just water quality itself because we have a lot of information about fish health, algae blooms, and so many other efforts that are going on in the basin. So if you haven't visited the KBMP website, please, take a look at that to see what might be of value there for you. And if you have reports or data or anything else that you think we should be sharing on the KBMP website, please let us know. Please email us and keep us in the loop. Probably the most visible part of KBMP are the KBMP meetings that we operate twice a year, which is why we're here today, and really to talk about that latest science that's going on in the basin with everything related to water quality and other resource management topics. Just to kind of highlight some of the details about KBMP meetings, this is our 35th meeting, and I've been real proud to be running these meetings for quite a long time. Over the course of the whole program, we've had over 450 different talks, panel discussions, breakout sessions, and other agenda items. So it's just been a tremendous amount of information that's been shared about the science, about planning, and really about just getting those conversations started, meeting people in your network, and just learning from the collective knowledge of so many different people who have presented to this group. For the most part, we do share the slides as PDFs on our KBMP page. There are some situations where the data, there's a lot of provisional data displayed and they don't want that presented, which is totally understandable. We also have recordings for many of our recent meetings if you want to go back and, like I said, either look at the slides or watch the video of the presentation. So please, visit our webpage for that. Real briefly, I've talked about this at many previous meetings, but every few years we survey our members about the monitoring locations and the monitoring that they are doing. To summarize our most recent assessment of 2024 monitoring efforts, we had over 1,200 monitoring locations that are monitored by both KBMP members and then just other organizations in the basin. And we put all that information into an interactive map where you can look at what particular parameters are being monitored, where, by whom, how frequently, what's the season that's being monitored. So a ton of information that includes, a lot of water quality parameters, but also information about what fisheries and fish health monitoring is going on, flow, lake levels, meteorology information that's available, snow, rain, wind, weather, a lot of different information that we feel is going to be valuable in different ways. And so this is a great place to go find out what is being monitored and where. One thing that's really helpful is, the map is a great resource, but we also have an Excel file that contains the same metadata that you can download from our monitoring location webpage. And the beauty of Excel is you can go through and you can sort and filter on the specific, creek or subbasin or organization or parameter that you have an interest in. And so that's a great way to really dial in and see what exactly you want to know. With that said, we know we have still a somewhat incomplete list of these monitoring locations. So if you did not respond to our survey last year, or actually earlier this year, please reach out. We really would love to have the most complete picture possible. And so having your metadata is really of interest to us. One thing we have done this year is we have formed and facilitated a technical advisory committee to help look at what water quality parameters are a priority to continue to collect that data. One reason for that is, we've always known that funding for monitoring is fairly limited, and there's potential for funding to be even more restricted moving forward. So, we want to kind of identify what those highest priority monitoring parameters are. In a collective sense. At the same time, we want to, make sure we recognize that, each of these organizations that are out there doing the lion's share of the work, collecting the data, the real heroes here, they run their own programs. They have their priorities and their reasons for monitoring what they do. And so we do need to identify that a little bit of a difference there between that collective interest and then, the organization that's collecting that data and their interests. So just want to kind of point that part out. So through the process, the TAC developed priorities both for the entire basin that are kind of generalized parameters that are a priority, and then more specific plans for each subbasin, which obviously is going to have some differences in what is important. And then we have separately kind of accounted for the priorities for the two main regulatory agencies for water quality. So we can kind of look at those and compare that to how these collective priorities are. So just to kind of show a little bit of detail about what some of those priorities are for water quality, we have, the general SOND parameters that are included on most SONDs these days. We have a variety of nutrients for, different analytes for nitrogen, phosphorus, and carbon. We have a couple sediment related parameters. And then we also have flow and weather recognized because of how interconnected they are to really understanding the full picture of water quality. So slightly adjacent to water quality, but still critical to the bigger picture. When we talk SONDs, I want to make sure we're not just collecting a single field measurement of dissolved oxygen and temperature, et cetera. Really, what we want to have are those continuous SONDs that have real-time reporting. Those are just incredibly valuable for understanding what those conditions are for fish and aquatic life. Ideally, we want to also make sure SONDs have the turbidity sensor, because then we can hopefully correlate with some suspended sediment concentration data and develop ways to kind of assess nutrient loads as well. So, when we have that data at the USGS gauge, we're able to, put all that information together and really, generate a bigger and better picture of water quality. So while I'm highlighting SONs here, it's not really a higher priority than the nutrient and other parameters that we've identified. But again, they are, really helpful when we want to look at how an ecosystem is functioning. And we can often say a little bit about, whether there's excessive nutrient concentrations based on, what those SON parameters are telling us. So it's really, it's very important, but not something that officially has a higher priority. If we look at just an example of one particular subbasin in the Shasta, we can see that the KBMP TAC identified a variety of parameters as a primary and then as secondary priorities. But then those are slightly different from what the North Coast Regional Board identified as their priorities. So just want to recognize that those may not always be exactly the same. And that importantly, there's a few here that weren't included in our metadata survey with the single asterisk. And so we don't have a lot of information about monitoring for those parameters. And then there were a few parameters that were on our list for metadata that we identified that did not have monitoring in the Shasta subbasin. So the take-home point for these is because we now know that information, having this list will help us, kind of discuss future monitoring efforts with the partners in the basin and ideally kind of help address those gaps so we can address these priorities for water quality monitoring. A lot of this information for the TAC was really vital for revising our water quality monitoring plan. It's been a while since we've updated it, and in general, we want to make sure we're kind of giving a background on some of the water quality impairments, both generally and then within each subbasin. We want to kind of summarize that monitoring efforts by the stakeholders who, like I said before, they're the ones really collecting this important data. Point out the value of maintaining a coordinated monitoring effort and maintaining these legacy monitoring stations. And we want to then compare that 2024 monitoring to the priorities of the TAC, ODEQ, and the North Coast Board. I want to kind of recognize that this monitoring plan is a bit different than maybe a typical monitoring plan might be. Part of that is because there are 36 different organizations who are collecting water quality data in the Klamath in 2024. So the challenges there is each of those programs are running independently, and many of them have their own funding and their own purposes for doing the monitoring and their own priorities for where they're monitoring and what they're monitoring for. So I just want to kind of recognize that while we have these collective needs that we've identified, the reality is how and why each organization performs monitoring is still going to be up to them. Just to kind of highlight those 36 different organizations who are involved in monitoring, that's a tremendous number of stations where data is being captured by these organizations. So just want to highlight kind of the diversity of the organizations involved, as well as just the sheer number of those unique locations. Kind of moving forward with the caveat that we will need funding to do this. We want to take that information from the TAC and the monitoring plan to look at what those gaps are in that redundancy in monitoring efforts, and really bring that information back to our partners just to talk about how we can better collaborate and share data and try to save money and address additional parameters and locations. When we talk about collaboration and data sharing, it's really important that we make sure that the quality control of that data is going to be of sufficient level that people can trust it. And so, revisiting the QA/QC plans with our partners, I think, is really valuable to make sure it does meet those standards, or we can help them, address what shortfalls there are. And we want to really help, work with the partners to look at those short-term monitoring needs for research questions, as well as, maintaining that long-term network. So with all those stations, there's just a tremendous amount of monitoring data out there. There have been two parallel efforts recently to look at and prioritize those monitoring for both water quality and fisheries, with the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission looking at the fisheries monitoring this year. So when it comes down to it, it's important to understand what those priorities are, but that data, who has access to that data? What are the questions that we can answer with that data? So, there's a ton of ways to look at it. Can we look at that provisional data, that's real-time data to manage species or flows? Do we take the finalized data that's undergone quality control to look at status and trends over the long term? Do we want to help guide, where to do restoration projects or evaluate the success of individual projects? There's so many different types of questions that can be answered here. And so the important part is, we need to get input from a lot of different members to identify what those most important data questions are for the basin. One way to kind of simplify how we access and analyze data are through data visualization tools. We have ways to help look at and simplify data access and analysis, and I think that's really so important. The Creek Tribe, they had a water quality website that gives access to real-time water quality and flow data that's been up for quite a few years. I want to just thank the Creek Tribe for making that data available, because it's really been critical for looking at when there are fish health concerns, to really understand the impacts from dam removal and just in general understand those ecosystem water quality conditions. And data visualization tools have come a long way in recent years. Basically you can develop scripts that can query data that's in public databases or databases that you are given access to, and then you can create these tools that can standardize an analysis of the exact data that you want to include. So at KBMP, we've talked for a long time about having a central database for water quality, but that really isn't necessary in a sense in this case. All the data doesn't have to be stored in the same location if we can query it and display that data in data visualization tools. So this can make it a lot easier to also combine different types of data that come from different databases. If a particular question requires, looking at, water quality data, what the fish migration movements are, what flow is. So there's just tons of ways that this information can be looked at through, customized data visualization tools. They can be simple, or in the case of what is being done in the Columbia right now, it can be just very extensive. They've really created a central location here where you can have access to just an incredible amount of data, different models and different visualization tools that kind of seem to do a little bit of everything. And so, to kind of address this, what we are doing right now is we are partnering with the Klamath Basin Fisheries Collaborative to try to get some funding to facilitate some scoping meetings. The idea is kind of look at those collective priorities for data sharing and analysis that go beyond just water quality or just fisheries information, and really to get buy-in from the partners who are managing data to allow them to improve how that data is shared. And in some cases that might be making data public. In other cases there might be data visualization tools that help us analyze data but are still restricted to certain users. We have to understand the kind of points here of what a particular data manager might be comfortable with. And so through this hopeful scoping meeting process, we want to be able to mock up some of those tools that they're identified as priorities, and that we can make it easier to look at data and make decisions. And then once we have those priorities, to then seek some funding to develop these tools and then host them. So in general, we want to really find ways to help data managers develop tools so they don't have to. Simplify and centralize this process. And in a way that you've been to different KBMP meetings before, you've heard me talk about silos of our different worlds of fisheries, water quality, restoration, planning, integrating these different silos, I think can really be, helped by doing and having these data visualization tools. So keep an eye out on where we're going with this in the coming months. But to focus on where we are today, we've got 11 different presentations on just a variety of topics, some of which relate to water quality, but not all of them. And then at the end, we'll have an open discussion period that will just allow us to talk about whatever updates or anything we want to talk about. Just real briefly, we have our general meeting guidelines. They are on the back page of the agenda, so I won't harp on these now, but kindergarten rules is one way to simplify it. And just some logistics, please stay muted, of course. If you have a question, you can either use the raise your hand feature, or you can just put your question into the chat, and then at the end, someone will read that. And then, if you have a name that is easily recognizable, that's really helpful. If you haven't attended a KBMP meeting before, we'd really appreciate you typing your name or again email into the chat so we can keep in touch. But we just really want to be able to recognize who is on the call, so we can reach out and follow up. I see a Diego, a Fox. We don't know who that is. So if you can please just put an easier to understand name, that would be really helpful. And then probably not today, but we will be posting PDFs of the slides, and then it might take some time, but get the recordings up on the KBMP website. So I think that's all I have for today. I don't know if there's really major questions here, but I want to thank you all for joining us, and want to kind of send this off to our first speaker. So I will ask Mike Diaz with Watercourse Engineering who will be the MC for this morning session.